Okay, class. We now back. Remember I said we are now going down the trachea, and the last part of the trachea is the carina. So this here is a picture of flexible bronchoscopy. This is a flexible bronchoscope being passed. This is the carina, and these two openings here are going into the main stem bronchi, which would be these two. So you're looking actually inside, going in, and these two. So you've passed it down past the vocal cord area on the way down, just to show you. All right, so now we're into the bronchus, main stem bronchi. Remember, this carina is the last cough reflex area. All right, so we are now there. So let's come over here. So we now have the alveoli, but before we get that, we want to do the main stem bronchi. Okay, the main stem bronchi, I'm going to come down here. So here we are. Let's go here. Here comes the main stem bronchi. I'm here, the trachea, I'm sorry. And then we come to the main stem bronchi. The main stem bronchi go to the two lungs. The main stem bronchi go to the two lungs. Okay. Then we get to what we call the secondary bronchi. The secondary. Now the secondary bronchi go to the lobe. So they're also called the lobar bronchi. Now you have 3 lobes of the lung on the right side and 2 on the left. 3 on the right, 2 on the left. So that means when it comes to the right side, I'm going to have 3 secondary, and on the left, 2 secondary. So that's going to the lobes of the lung. Okay? And we'll talk about the lung later. Then we come into the tertiary bronchi. The tertiary bronchi go to what we call the bronchopulmonary segments. So a lobe, inside a lobe are little airbags. Inside a lobe are little airbags called bronchopulmonary segments. Inside a lobe are little airbags called bronchopulmonary segments. Okay? Bronchopulmonary segments. Now, the bronchopulmonary segments, let's go here if I can get them again. The bronchopulmonary segments are subdivisions of a lobe. Okay? Each of these is going to a different bronchopulmonary segment. The bronchopulmonary segment is the smallest surgical division of the lung. Let me say it again. The bronchopulmonary segment is the smallest surgical division of the lung. Okay, let me explain what I'm saying in that. If you had trouble with one whole lung, you could take it out and live because you'd have the other lung. If you had cancer or a problem with one lobe of a lung, you could take this lobe out and the other 2 lobes would stay inflated. Okay? If you had cancer in one of the bronchopulmonary segments within a lobe, you could take that bronchopulmonary segment out of that lobe and the rest of the lobe would stay inflated. But if you had it within a bronchopulmonary segment, an area, you could not take out a part of a bronchopulmonary segment because the whole bronchopulmonary segment would collapse. So the smallest part that a surgeon can take out and not collapse the whole thing is a bronchopulmonary segment. And that's why it's called the last surgical division of the lung. The last surgical division of the lung. So what do we have? The trachea broke off into 2 main stem bronchi, then secondary bronchi, then tertiary bronchi, which are called which go to the bronchopulmonary segments. Okay? All right. Now, we come back then, and from the bronchopulmonary segments, okay, to tertiary, then we just have a bunch of bronchi, All right, just a bunch of bronchi. Okay, where we are now then, we have now gone, I went back to this, we've come down, and we did the primary bronchi, the secondary bronchi, go here. Then we did the tertiary, let's say now where we are, let me Let me make this a little smaller. Come across. Where we are now is branching till we get to the bronchioles. So the next thing we get to are the bronchioles. Okay. Now, I want to draw your attention up here. I'm going to go back up. When we were in the bronchus, we had cartilage. Now, the cartilage started getting smaller and smaller in amount. Remember that collapsing pressure. But when I come here to the bronchiole, when I go to bronchiole word, we use smooth muscle. So one of the key things to become a bronchiole is it gets smaller, just like arterioles did, but you no longer have cartilage. Now smooth muscle is enough to support the wall. Why? Because the collapsing pressure is not as great. Okay, so we branch off of bronchioles. Remember, we're trying to get 23 to 28 divisions. Until finally we come to what we call a terminal bronchiole. Okay? The terminal bronchiole has a simple cuboidal epithelium. Okay? It's still a little thick to do diffusion through. Still a little thick. So the next one we come to is a respiratory. Now remember, terminal means the end. But this is what it's saying. It's the last of the conducting zone. Now the epithelium has gotten thin enough with the respiratory bronchiole to be the first time that it's thin enough to do some diffusion through. First time. Okay? So now we're into the respiratory bronchioles. All right. Now, from the respiratory bronchioles, here we're in the respiratory zone. From the respiratory bronchioles, let's just come here, get that respiratory zone over here too. I'd like you to see plenty of pictures. From that respiratory bronchiole, then I can come back up here and follow my scheme. Now we're to the alveolar ducts. And then and they're getting thinner and thinner. And then from the alveolar ducts to alveolar sacs to finally alveoli. Okay? So respiratory bronchiole goes off into alveolar ducts, and going into ducts would be sacs, and then the sacs give the actual alveoli. So here's a duct right there. And now here are these alveoli, alveolar ducts, alveolar sacs, and see going up in there. And so the alveoli are simple squamous. And that's really where the good stuff is. That's really where the main exchange is going to be. So we have gone all the way to the very bottom. We started with the nose and mouth and went all the way down. Okay. The respiratory membrane, air blood, is composed of alveoli, capillary walls, and we'll be talking about that when we get into the alveoli. Okay. All right. So that's where we are. And see, here's those blood vessels around the alveoli and everything. Okay. That's those blood vessels. And so the alveolar walls are very thin. Here's the respiratory membrane. I want to draw your attention to this in the alveolus. I want you to read on this too. See, here would be simple squamous cells. And we're going to talk about the cells that you'll have on the alveolus here. But on the alveolus, you have the simple squamous cells, which are called type 1 pneumatocytes, you can read. That's the alveolar type 1 pneumatocytes. Then we have the type 2, which we call septal cells. And septal cells secrete something called surfactant that we'll talk about. Surfactant prevents surface tension. So type 2. Then type 3 are called dust cells or alveolar macrophages, because to try to get and eat up, because remember epithelial cells regenerate a lot. So I need to get rid of these and anything else, and that's those type 3. But the type 2 produce something called surfactant. So we're going to talk on that in a moment there, but I want to go to something else. So we're going to talk on this surfactant. All right. Right here. But before we do that, I want to now start talking about the mathematics of everything. So where I'm going to go now is going to be, and I don't see where I put it here, I want to now get into the mathematics of how this action that you would have. Okay? And so that's where we're going to go next, is to the mathematics of airflow and everything. And then we're going to come back to this right after I do that. Okay? And that'll help explain everything. All right. So we'll close here.